Welcome to Beyond the Battlefield, Stories of Mountain and Air, the podcast that delves into the diverse and compelling careers of the Vermont National Guard and its members. I'm your host, Sergeant Dennis Nunez, Public Affairs Specialist for the Vermont National Guard Joint Force Headquarters. Each episode features a candid conversation with current military personnel in order to shine a light on their personal experiences in and out of uniform. Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind these soldiers and airmen and explore the motivations that drive individuals to pursue a career in the armed forces. I'm joined today by Major John Lescure from Aviation, Army Aviation, and we're here to talk about a little bit about what you guys have been doing over the past year and a half. I understand that you were in a deployment and your group has just recently returned from CENTCOM. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Very excited to be here today. As you mentioned, Major John Lescure from Charlie Company, 3rd of the 126 Medevac. And we recently deployed to CENTCOM. We were deployed to 6 different Medevac sites across 4 countries in the area. We had a total of 107 folks that we brought, not all of them from Vermont. It was a group from Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And we joined forces to make up a Medevac company. That company executed over 350 Medevac missions, saving and transporting soldiers from a variety of countries to include the United States.
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, you're talking about almost one a day, going out on mission and things like that, and in such austere environments as well. Is there anything that you can share? I know that some of this might be a little sensitive and what we can and can't talk about, but if there's anything you could share with us about the experiences over there, what your soldiers and airmen, air people, sorry, not to confuse with the Air Force, went through while being overseas.
Sure, absolutely. So most Army units have a combat weapons system. And we talk about the Medevac mission of our medic is our combat system. So our medics are incredibly highly trained. They're critical care flight paramedics. They go to almost 2 years of schooling to reach that level of certification. So what that means for us is that we provide such a high level care in the back of that helicopter that we can take anybody that ranges from, small boo-boos and belly aches is what we kind of called it, all the way to traumatic injuries. So our medics transported casualties all the way from very minor injuries of bumps and bruises to very critical patients that needed life-saving intervention, and we had an extremely high rate of success moving those casualties across the battlefield.
That's pretty amazing. As a former combat medic myself, I have to ask, what is the process for one of these medics to become a flight paramedic and join the unit and kind of get put into these sort of combat units that are in the air? Sure.
So it all starts with the 68 Whiskey, that combat medic that does so much for our military system and preserving that fighting force. From there, that paramedic would need to get certified to be able to fly, and how they do that is through a flight physical. They need to be physically qualified to be able to operate in the air in a small environment, and then they go to schooling. They go to a critical care flight paramedic course. That's at Fort Sam Houston or Joint Base San Antonio, down in Texas, and then they go to smaller courses at Fort Novosel, which is it's where the flight school is, and that they learn to be a crew member in that capacity. Because a typical medic might not have any experience working in a helicopter, and they want to make sure that they're able to operate in that type of environment. Similar to a fighting vehicle, it's just a confined space. They don't have a lot of resources, and they need to be able to work efficiently in those spaces.
And for, the people that kind of are back here at home, maybe not realizing what you guys have been going through, what are some of the challenges that you feel like your team faced and maybe had to kind of rise up against while you were overseas?
Sure. So October 7th was a real defining date in our deployment. Prior to October 7th, we had a fairly low threat or a lower than normal threat in CENTCOM, and we were still conducting our missions. Soldiers were still getting hurt doing day-to-day activities. There were car crashes. There were things that, soldiers breaking bones and dog bites and other things of that nature. After October 7th, we dealt with a lot of issues with site security. We had to deal with a lot of incoming drone activity and hostile drones to our location, and we still had to conduct our medevac mission. So conducting that medevac mission with that threat, it just made us refine our procedures, understand what our capabilities were, and be able to still execute those procedures even with an increased threat level.
Now, do you feel like you guys maybe changed things that might have enhanced protocol behavior, or maybe pushed kind of your medical units to do things in different ways while you were there? Or do you think it was kind of a standard sort of typical type of op?
Yeah, I think we had to adjust with the changing environment, and what that looked like is we had to make educated guesses on the types of patients that we would be receiving, and after October 7th, we anticipated that we might be getting casualties that were in a more critical status. So what that meant for us in a medical capacity was we would carry more blood with us. We would carry more things that we thought the patients might need. Turns out that wasn't quite the case. We didn't actually end up needing that, and it was still a typical patient load after October 7th. We got called a little bit more, but not to the critical casualties that we thought we might get.
So how do you prepare your teams when you obviously you have some pre-mobilization training before you're going overseas, but how are you staying up to par when you're over there, staying ready to go? What type of training goes into what your teams are doing?
Sure. So our pre-mobilization training was a great baseline that only goes so far. So when we got to our sites, each of the 6 different sites operated that a little bit differently. How we operated at our site was we had a small group of people. We had 16 folks there, and those consisted of pilots, crew chiefs, and medics. And what we did to stay proficient is every week we would run a medevac drill. And that drill would assess, can we get to the helicopter quick enough? Can we take off quick enough? Can our medics be prepared with the equipment that they need in a timely manner? Because we were dealing with temperatures in the summertime that exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So you would imagine you can't leave some things in the helicopter. You can't leave blood in the helicopter just waiting for a call. So that it created a bit of a challenge for our medical team to have to understand and practice how to get that equipment in a timely manner, get it on the helicopter, and configure the aircraft to be able to receive casualties and treat them en route. It also provided a weight issue for us as pilots to be able to consider how heavy the helicopter was. In that hot environment, it just doesn't perform as well as it does in like winters in Vermont, say. So we had to consider how much fuel we had on board, how many bags we could take, how many patients we could take if we got them. And so it was all a dynamic consideration that we would just change as the seasons changed, as the threat changed, and as our predicted patients changed.
So we've talked a lot about the medical assets and the medical folk. Can we talk about the pilots a little and kind of what type of training, a pilot or someone interested in becoming a pilot in the Vermont National Guard kind of goes through?
Yeah, so training as a pilot, like I mentioned earlier, is at Fort Novosel. That's a training base down in Alabama. To become a pilot, it really takes drive, interest, and aptitude. You don't need to be a pilot on the civilian side. You don't need to have thousands or hundreds of hours in a small Cessna. You can come to us, and the Army's going to teach you how to fly a helicopter. And what I mean by that is we want to see motivation. We want to see that you're interested and going to be a long-term member of this organization, because we're going to put the resources into you to make you a pilot. And that'll happen at Fort Novosel, and then that'll increase as you get back to Vermont and continue readiness level progression. That'll take somewhere between 1 to 3 years to be able to complete that training to be a fully functioning pilot. From there, pilots move on from a pilot status to a pilot in command status, and then they look for what we call tracks in the industry, and those tracks would be safety, aviation mission survivability, maintenance test pilot, or instructor pilot. And those are the 4 tracks that we specialize our pilots in.
So, what was the day-to-day like for your teams out there? I imagine that they would have some downtime. They would also be on mission, maybe a rotational basis.
Yeah, it was oddly, we had a very standard routine that we just needed to ingrain in all the crew members so that we could respond at any time. So each site worked a little bit differently based off the constraints of their site and how close they might have been to their aircraft, where they were sleeping and living. What we did at the site that I was at was we ran 48-hour shifts. And what that meant was a crew, 2 pilots, a crew chief, and a medic were on call for 48 hours, and that was times 2. So there was 2 aircraft that flew on any given mission. And while they were on call, they could sleep, they could eat, they could do their daily duties of kind of keeping up and life cycle things. But they would also have additional duties of doing limited maintenance on aircraft to make sure that they were in a ready shape to be able to conduct a mission anywhere in the AO. The medics would conduct training on making sure their skills were up to where they needed to be and proficient, and then they would conduct classes with our coalition forces for a limited period because they needed to maintain rest, because any time during that 48-hour shift, they could be called on a up to 6-hour mission. So they would be doing that. What I would be doing, my daily duty would be to review all of the ground missions in the AO and just make sure there's a satisfactory medevac plan for them. And if I saw concern with any of the ground operations, I would bring that up and say, this mission might not have an adequate medevac response, and then they would assess risk based off of that.
And you mentioned maintenance of the aircraft itself. I'm curious, how do you kind of go about making sure that your flight line's ready, that you have all the things that you need to make sure that these mechanical beasts are ready to go at all times, and that you don't deal with mechanical failures?
Sure, it's incredibly stressful. There are not any extra pieces, parts, or helicopters. Everything is being used to the best of its ability overseas because we need to do so many different things, and those aircraft are being pushed right to the limits. So it's a very interesting planning game where you need to understand what's going to happen next on the aircraft, and you need to, in some ways, do your best to guess and have some institutional knowledge of what might happen and some experience. But then there's also planned things that you need to be planning for and be able to use additional assets. So I'll give an example. We had a certain amount of helicopters that were set aside just for medevac operations. If we couldn't maintain that, we could potentially use a different airframe. So if we were going into, say, a hostile environment, maybe an Apache, more of an attack type aircraft, would escort us. Or even if we needed to move a lot of people, a Chinook could provide more of a Casevac scenario where they could carry more people. All of those things impact care. So they all, if you have too many people and not enough medics, they can't give the care to the patient that they might need. Or if you have an aircraft like an Apache that can't carry people, then you reduce that ability to take care of multiple patients. So it all goes, every time you change something, you increase the risk, or you change the outcome, or you change the care to that patient. And at the end of the day, our primary mission is giving the best care to that patient that we can.
What are your biggest takeaways from this past mission that you come home, obviously lessons learned, things that you bring back? What are some of the biggest things that you think that you maybe saw over there and then brought back and said, we're going to implement that at home?
I'd say the biggest thing was flexibility, and then the second biggest thing, equally important, is trust of subordinates. There are not enough people and not enough hours in the day for one leader to manage all goings-on of the medevac world. So on the deployment, Major David Johnston was our company commander, and he did an excellent job of pushing those leadership roles down to the platoon leaders, the section leaders, the warrant officers, and really diversifying that leadership and the responsibilities throughout the entire company. I say flexibility because every single mission was different, and every single mission had the potential of us having what we call the 15-minute call, where we get a medevac call, we have to have that aircraft in the air in 15 minutes. And that's no trivial exercise. You think of getting on an airline and going somewhere. There's no way that airplane's taking off within 15 minutes from the time the boarding doors open. Wow. So it's a very quick hustle to the aircraft. Everybody needs to know their job. Everybody needs to be an expert at their job, and things will change, and we need to be able to be flexible to adapt to those changes.
Is there anything that you'd like to kind of leave us with? Any sort of last thoughts, comments that you might have about your time over there, your soldiers, and anything that they went through?
Yeah, I'd like to talk specifically about how the Guard might have been different than an active duty unit that did the same mission. I mentioned earlier we came together as 3 states to make the medevac mission: Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. Those units consisted of the full-time staff that were full-time AGR technician soldiers. They also consisted of M-Day soldiers that had civilian jobs on the outside. And what that did for us and has done in the past for the Vermont National Guard is it provides a lot of resources and a lot of non-military skills that can prove critical in an austere environment. So when we're trying to develop things and we have people that are electricians on the civilian side, they know how to run an electrical system. They know how those things work. When they're plumbers, when we have plumbing that breaks, we can fix that internally, and we're not relying on some contractor or somebody else to fix our things. We're self-sufficient. We're good at our jobs, and I know everyone's very, very proud to wear that Green Mountain flag.
And if you had advice for maybe someone who's already in, maybe someone who's thinking about joining, but wants to specifically become a part of your crews, what type of advice would you give them, maybe as prep or something to kind of look forward? I know you said that you got to have the drive, you got to have the motivation. Are there any specifics as far as like what you actually need to accomplish in order to kind of prerequisite yourself there? Sure.
I'll start with the folks that aren't necessarily in the organization yet. They don't know what they don't know, and they need to get in our organization to understand that. It's not a linear path. There are so many options within this organization that I continue to learn about every single day that I'm in it, and I've been in for 17 years. So if they're not in the organization, they need to move in a direction that gets them in the organization, and that's when they're going to start their learning journey. If they're already in the organization, then although aviation is a small component of the Vermont National Guard, it's not invisible. So please reach out, contact, find a warrant officer, find a pilot, find a crew chief or a medic, and we want to talk to you. We want to bring you to drill, and we want to show you what we do, because it's not just watching the helicopter fly over your house or fly over at Camp Johnson. There's a lot that goes into it, and we need more people that are qualified, motivated, and want to be medics, crew chiefs, pilots, fuelers, operations specialists, and the like.
Major John Lescure, Army Aviation, Vermont National Guard, thank you so much for being with us today. I appreciate your time and for giving us the insight as to the amazing job you and your folks did over in CENTCOM, and what you continue to do. We obviously see you in the air every once in a while here around the state of Vermont and the valley, the county. And, you know, for me, as a former combat medic, personally, I love to hear those rotors going. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. This has been Beyond the Battlefield, Stories of Mountain and Air. Thank you again for joining us today. And folks, remember, stay curious, stay inspired, and always keep ascending.